All right, at this point I'm going to pause our discussion of synthesis methods for just a minute so that I can go over some of the other controls. Since we're looking at Thor a little more in depth, we might as well follow through the signal flow. So we have our sound generators here, the oscillators. We have our filters. There are a total of 3 of them on this device. And then we have envelope generators. There are 4 envelope generators. The typical filter envelope here, the amp envelope, those are both typical on every synthesizer. There is a modulation envelope that we can apply to do things like changing the pitch of an oscillator, changing the cutoff frequency of a filter, etc. And then there's over here another global envelope. These 3 that we looked at just previously, the filter, the amp, and the modulation envelope, are typical 4-cycle or 4-section envelope generators. The modulation envelope it's got 4 settings, but if you notice, there's a delay setting and then ADR, so attack, decay, and release. There's a delay time that you can adjust first before the envelope kicks in, and then you can adjust attack, decay, and release. And again, this is to modulate something like change a pitch. So you could potentially play a chord and set a rather long delay so nothing happens, but eventually if you hold the chord long enough, you can have this envelope modulate the pitch of the oscillators, to change the pitch as you hold the notes, or maybe to change the filter cutoff frequency to make the sound brighter or more muted, okay, according to the settings here. These are typical ADSR envelope generators: attack, decay, sustain, and release. And let's look at this global envelope. That's kind of interesting. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 segments. There's a delay, just like we saw in the mod envelope here, the modulation envelope. And then we have an attack. And then there's a hold. So you can adjust a delay and then sweeping up of an attack, and then hold once you get to the end of that attack segment. And then decay kicks in, release, sustain, and release. So it's a 6-segment envelope generator. These different types of envelopes add a lot of flexibility to your and possibilities for you when you're programming new sounds. Right? So we've talked about sound generators, filters, envelope generators. The last thing of those 4 synthesizer components that we've identified is modulation. And that's where Thor really shines. It has typical sources of modulation. It has not 1, but 2 LFOs. There's one here, another one here, the mod envelope that we already talked about. And then what really makes Thor a wonderful instrument is this area down here. This is called a modulation matrix. And it's really cool. It takes a long time to really figure out all of the possibilities here. But let me just show you a few things. Let's say I have now, as I do, my 2 sawtooth waveforms running through a low-pass filter, and I want to create some wobble, some vibrato. I want to use this LFO to modulate the pitch of these oscillators. The way that works on this device is a little more complex than the way it worked on Subtractor, but with that added complexity is a lot more possibilities for new and interesting things. So follow me as I walk you through some simple steps in using this modulation matrix. First thing I'm going to do is look at this LFO. I want it to eventually modulate the pitch of these 2 oscillators. I can choose the waveform, the shape of that modulation. Square wave would be like an on-off type modulation. So if I played the note da, and applied this square wave, it would sound like da 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 da. If I use a triangle or a sine wave, it's going to be a more gradual increase and decrease in pitch. I play the note da, and what I'll hear is da, bending the pitch up and down. So that's what I want to go for. I'm going to keep that sine wave selected. We'll adjust the rate a little later. I'm going to set it low because I know I'm not going to want it going too fast. All right, and right now we don't hear the effect of that LFO yet. That's where the modulation matrix comes in. We have to select that LFO as our source of our modulation. So I'm going to click right in this source field here, and I'm going to go down to LFO1. And then we have an amount which we'll set in a minute, but I'm going to skip that column and go to the third column here, which says DEST, which stands for destination. So basically, I have to tell Thor what I want to do with that LFO. And what I want to do is send it to oscillator 1 pitch. And now I'll play a note, and while I'm playing a note, I'm going to gradually increase this amount. No effect yet. But as I increase it, it's really bending the pitch way up and way down. And again, I can control the speed over here on the LFO. Let's increase the rate. And let's make that effect more subtle. Okay? It's really obvious when I have two oscillators sounding and I bend the pitch or modulate one of them, it really sounds out of tune. If I want just a typical vibrato effect and I want to modulate both oscillators, here's how I would do it. In the next field of my matrix, the next source field, I'll select the very same LFO1. And in the destination, I'll select oscillator 2 pitch. And I'll set, or try to get the amount set to be about the same, 34. And now I get a typical vibrato sound. Over here on the LFO, one of the kind of neat settings is this delay. I'm going to turn delay way up. You notice when I played the note, the vibrato took a while before it kicked in. That's because of this delay setting. Okay? So that's how you would route a modulation source to a destination. And where Thor really shines is just the incredible number of sources for possible that you can possibly use for modulation. There are just a ton of them here. And some of them are kind of obvious how they would work. Some are less intuitive and require some experimentation. But that's, again, where Thor really shines. Thor is not the only software synth that has matrix modulation. There are several of them on the market. And if you're a person who really enjoys creating sounds from scratch, it might be something that you want to consider when you're in the market for a new software synth, a modulation matrix. So the sources have many choices, destinations, many choices, etc. Let's take a look now at another type of modulation. I'm going to clear these out and we're going to start with something else. I'm going to use a different source. This time I'm going to leave the pitch alone and I'm going to use the modulation envelope. Okay, so that's this up here, the mod envelope. And I'm going to select that as my source, mod envelope. And I'm going to route it to filter 1's cutoff frequency. And I'm going to put, for right now, I'm going to make the amount very high. And I'll make some adjustments here. I'll lower the cutoff frequency on that filter and raise the resonance a little bit. Don't hear any effect yet. I think that might have to do with the fact that this delay is set pretty high on that modulation envelope. Let's turn down the delay. Definitely hear it now. If I slow or raise the attack time, it's going to attack more slowly, and we should hear that filter sweeping up a little more slowly. Yeah, I'm kind of losing the overall sound before I get that full sweep. I can fix that down here with these envelopes, the filter envelope. I'm going to set this one so that it's full on off. I'm going to set the amp envelope the same way. So as long as I'm holding a key down, let's set the sustain all the way up. So as long as I'm holding a key down, it will continue to make sound. So now you hear the filter sweeping up and sweeping down. I can adjust the upward sweep, the rate, the speed with the attack, and the downward sweep with the decay. Let's have a slow attack, so a slow upward sweep and then a quicker downward sweep. That quick downward sweep was because of the shorter decay time. Okay, so that's an example of modulation envelope modulation. I can send that to pitch too. If I want a real weird effect, I can use that same modulation to go to the pitch of oscillator 1. So the two oscillators will be swept in and out of tune, or out of and then back into tune, I should say. A little hard to hear, but let's increase the filter cutoff so we get more harmonic content here. And again, you can adjust the timing of those sweeps. And if you think, oh, it's sweeping too much, again, that's where you would adjust the amount here in the modulation matrix. I'll lower that amount. Let's hear it once again on full. Now I'll lower it down maybe to about 50 or so. Kind of a neat effect, right? So again, that's just a really quick look at the envelope generators and the modulation matrix. That's it for this tutorial. More on synthesis methods in the next section.